My name is Claire Miller, 37, a human resources specialist. A simple sentence, yet it carries the weight of a lifetime. The room was bustling, filled with laughter and lively conversation. But to me, it felt like a silent judgment. My eyes scanned each familiar face, but none seemed to notice what was truly happening. My brother, Ben, with his charming smile, was receiving congratulations. He was being awarded, and everyone applauded enthusiastically, as if he were the brightest of stars. He was skilled at crafting our family's narrative, but tonight, his words were about to reveal how he'd manipulated everyone into forgetting that the award and the achievements were actually mine. What I saw before me was a silent charade, a manipulation so profound that the opacity of the situation suffocated me. Every "Congratulations, Ben," I heard was a dagger in my heart. A silent resentment began to boil within me, not just for the injustice, but for the betrayal, the way he had distorted our family's perception of me. In a flash, I was back in the kitchen, a vivid memory of our parents, happy, while Ben recounted with shining eyes his achievements, perpetually portraying me as the younger, less successful sister. You know, I always had to deal with Claire. He'd let slip on one of the many occasions he boasted about his success. My parents' laughter echoed in that space, laughter that reinforced the label my brother had placed on me. Lost cause. I was the daughter who hadn't reached her ambitions, and he was the hero of the family narrative. Every compliment, every statement of his, was a construction built on the destruction of my own image. However, something else stirred within me. A hidden flame, a voice echoing through the shadows of that crowded room. They forgot the award was mine. It was a bitter irony that haunted me. My specialization in human resources wasn't just about degrees and diplomas. It was behavioral analysis, insight into human relationships, and the ability to perceive what was hidden beneath the surface. And the connection I had, the bond that cried out in my soul, was living proof that I had been neglected. I felt my blood heat up, not with anger, but with a renewed determination that flowed like a current of pure energy. I had worked hard to get where I was. Every project, every innovation I had introduced to the company, every talent I had managed to transform into stars, was a part of me, a part that Ben had subtly excluded from the narrative he told our parents. Frustration filled me, but also a clear sense of strategy pulsed within me. Finally, as everyone toasted my brother's image, I raised my glass and in a moment of boldness, commanded attention. "Excuse me for interrupting," I said, my voice sounding firmer than I felt. The conversation subsided, and all heads turned to me. I also have something to celebrate. The expressions on the faces around me ranged from confusion to curiosity. They were facets of an untold story, and I was determined to reveal how ingenious and compelling my life truly was. The silence settled among those present, and my mind raced, swirling around the accomplishments that had been so disregarded. It wasn't just the award that belonged to me. It was the recognition of my sweat and dedication. I've been working on a project that could revolutionize how we recruit and develop talent, I continued, meeting the gaze of each of them, trying to establish an emotional connection that would not only tell the truth, but also confront them with the reality they had chosen to ignore. And I don't intend to be ignored. You may have forgotten, but I'm here. Nerves mingled with adrenaline, but there was an unwavering focus behind my determination. What should have been a simple celebration had transformed into a moment of reclamation. I wasn't just holding my ground, I was planting a flag in the heart of the room, invoking the truth that had been stifled. Thus, surrounded by the festive atmosphere surrounding my brother, I began to plot. My game wouldn't be one of force, but of intelligence. Each subtle insult and his elaborate lies would be questioned and exposed in the light of day. It was a mind game that was about to unfold before me, and I would prepare for each move, observing, analyzing, and eventually, overcoming. The quest for recognition wasn't just a desire. It was a vital need. This could be a new beginning. Memories of my childhood and adolescence unraveled like a movie I couldn't pause, involuntarily captivating me. Under the soft light of the room where everyone was celebrating Ben, the faces of my family began to transform into shadows. Each smile seemed to hide a label I couldn't tear off, and each hug given to him felt like a knife in my heart. Ben was always the exemplary son, the favorite, while I was the eternal supporting actress in the narrative he loved to write. I remember one particular night when I was only 12, everyone gathered in the living room, preparing for what should have been a celebratory dinner. The table was laden with elaborate dishes, the aroma of spices filling the cozy atmosphere. That night, I felt particularly excited. I knew I had won an academic competition at school, something I thought would impress my family, and perhaps finally give me the recognition I craved. Trophy in hand, I rushed into the room, my heart pounding, as if this small object held the key to my redemption. But before I could open my mouth and share my achievement, Ben swooped in, once again the center of attention, recounting one of his soccer feats, as if my efforts were a mere drop in the ocean of his greatness. He had this way of monopolizing any conversation with extravagant stories and triumphs that seemed to suck the joy out of any victory I might have. The admiring glances directed at him were almost tangible, and I, with my gleaming trophy, felt invisible, like a ghost at a party. No one paid me any attention, and as despair began to set in, the trophy slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. That sound echoed like a warning of what was to come. My fight for recognition would be a long and treacherous battle. Ben's laughter cut through the air, a cruel joke that undermined the truth. "Hope that was a consolation prize, Claire," he sneered. The words, delivered with a mocking tone, were like poison, and a pot of frustration began to boil inside me as disdain settled in. Something broke in that room. I became the failing sister, a narrative he had skillfully crafted, which now seemed inescapable. Yet, even under this veil of scorn, my determination began to grow. I decided I wouldn't be a mere shadow in Ben's life. To reclaim my image, I sought refuge in the corporate world, specializing in human resources. The goal of transforming lives became my mission. The ability to help people rediscover their talents and reach their full potential was like fuel to my soul, and I dove headfirst into this pursuit. Over the years, each person I helped shine, each project I launched, became a small victory. There was a growing pride within me as I saw potential bloom from my teachings. But there was also a persistent feeling that these achievements didn't reach my family, a cloud of disinterest and indifference hanging over my successes. The cost of my ascent was the loneliness of recognition never received. Conversations at the dinner table remained uncomfortable and rife with subtext. "And you, Claire? How's your assistant career going?" My mother, Teresa, always laced her words with a subtle doubt, almost as if she wanted to downplay my achievements. She expected me to elaborate on my work, almost pleading for it to somehow dilute the belief Ben had implanted in everyone. "You should talk about it more. Maybe your father would be proud." The tone she used spoke volumes. Her words echoed an inability to see beyond the picture Ben had painted, and the expectation always fell on him, the model son. Sitting there, I felt my essence being slowly swallowed. In a moment of silent despair, I wondered if my family would ever recognize my worth. If I could articulate my frustrations, perhaps I could reclaim the pride I had always sought. With each victory he belittled, each new cycle of verbal abuse disguised as a joke or humor, something gnawed at me. A word of validation from my parents could change the entire dynamic, but it seemed a distant dream. Then, weeks turned into months, and I found myself focusing on my projects. I started listing the professional successes that lingered in my memories. There they were: new recruitment systems, diverse representation, inclusion of training programs, each a part of who I was and the positive impact I was making on people's lives. The reality was, we all knew each of these achievements deserved recognition. I decided it was time to bring to light what I had been hiding. Ben would start to feel threatened. It was decided. The day of the ceremony approached, and the idea of exposing myself became increasingly palpable. I began to plan how I could bring my achievements to light and expose the lies my brother had told. I needed a plan that was irrefutable and left no room for doubt. The game would be to incite, provoke, and expose every deception. I wouldn't be the invisible sister anymore. I would finally claim my space. Every detail of my life should be visible to their eyes. I could no longer accept being underestimated. With this understanding, I immersed myself in building a presentation. My achievements and my feelings of frustration would intertwine in a speech that would not only expose the truth, but also confront my brother. I wanted everyone to see a strong and determined Claire Miller, capable of building and transforming, instead of just a supporting actress. And so, the outline of my speech emerged, clear and progressive. I would talk about my journey, highlighting each step. The shadows of devaluation needed to dissipate. There should be no more room for silence. The situation I was reduced to shouldn't be my destiny. It would be just a part of the past that I was about to transform into a victory. The lights shining before me began to symbolize what was about to happen. It wasn't just a ceremony, but a chance to redefine my story. The recognition I had always sought was within my reach, and I was about to achieve it. Today, the award wouldn't just be a statuette for Ben, it would be the resilience of a woman who refused to be forgotten. As the day of the ceremony approached, a mixture of anxiety and determination simmered within me. The idea of confronting Ben and my family felt both liberating and terrifying. I didn't just want to expose the truth. I needed the proof to show that my work truly mattered and that I wasn't the lost cause everyone thought I was. When the spotlight was on me, I wouldn't be content to just stand there. I wanted to shine. The first step in my mission was to obtain records of my work over the past few years. I knew my professional history couldn't be relegated to oblivion. Amidst the pressure I was under, the focus wasn't just on evidence, but on understanding the depth of my contributions. I needed to ensure my voice was heard loud and clear. One sunny morning, upon entering the office, I closed the door behind me, creating a space for concentration. The sound of keyboards and background chatter became a distant hum as I navigated the files on my monitor. The clock showed only 10 a.m., but I was already immersed in a sea of data. I began gathering documents from projects, trainings, and feedback that demonstrated my direct impact on the team and the organization. What I found immediately surprised me. Performance reviews brimming with praise were buried under a mountain of other files. I read words expressing appreciation from colleagues and superiors. Words that had never truly resonated at home. Claire is a transformative force. One email read, "Claire doesn't just do her job. She inspires her team to grow and excel." Each of these statements became a powerful weapon I could use in both office discussions and at the ceremony. But as those reports unfolded before me, I realized that simply making a photocopy or jotting down quotes wasn't enough. I needed an ally. Someone who, like me, saw the value in the truth I was trying to reveal. The phone rang at a nearby desk, and I heard the familiar voice of my former mentor, Mr. Davis, who knew how hard I'd fought to be seen at work, and had always been one of the few who truly believed in me. "Hi, Mr. Davis. How are things?" My tone tried to convey a carefree air, but I was nervous. "Ah, Claire. Always a pleasure to hear from you. Listen, I know you're doing great, but what's going on? You sound a bit distracted," he said, concern dripping from his words. "It's because I'm preparing for the award ceremony and, honestly, my family, well, they have a very wrong idea about what I can actually do." The confession needed to come out. With each exchange of words, I felt closer to him. The conversation flowed naturally. As a wise mentor, he began discussing strategies. "For years, I've watched you shape and transform teams exceptionally. You don't need to justify yourself. What you need is to present concrete evidence. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." An idea bloomed. I wanted him to be by my side that day, not just as a mentor, but as a witness to my capabilities. We needed to gather more information, not just the papers I had in hand, but analyses that could support my trajectory. That day, we started working together again. We spent hours analyzing data, collecting feedback from third parties. He helped me formulate a presentation that would capture both heart and mind. The success stories he recounted about me were comforting, but more than that, they reminded me that I had always had potential. Every morning I dove into the work, reviewing and updating the necessary files. Those documents I had always considered mere routine were transforming into real weapons in a fight for validation. I began sketching out a speech that, instead of being mere rhetoric, would become the narrative of a lifetime of effort and resilience. I spoke with colleagues who had given me praise over the years and gathered their testimonies about my role in projects. "Claire, you've always been behind the success of this team," one colleague said. "Without your support, many of us wouldn't have been able to expand our skills as we did." These words warmed my heart as I noted the details. It would be a crucial moment. The data would coalesce with real-life stories. Time in the office seemed to accelerate. The day of the ceremony was drawing closer, and I found myself constantly reviewing and refining what I would say. However, the thought of standing before my family, presenting a side of me they refused to see, sent a chill down my spine. I began marking the elements that would form the core of my speech. Each achievement, each positive comment transformed into a block that I would fit into the presentation. With all this preparation, it seemed that with each step I took, I was recovering a piece of the small victories I felt I had lost. I was reclaiming my self-esteem and my space in this family narrative that Ben had shaped. In due course, the notes transformed into an outline. Notes stuck to the walls of my office, full of markings and scribbles, reflected my journey of discovery and overcoming. The evidence was taking concrete shape, and I knew that, before the audience, I couldn't hesitate. Block 3. The day of the ceremony seemed to float through my thoughts. Moments of expectation and uncertainty intertwined in my heart, but a stronger determination took hold. I was ready to bring to life everything I had prepared. The truth that had always been hidden was about to be revealed, and I would do everything possible to ensure that my value was finally recognized. The stage lights took shape in my mind. I was busy making the most of everything I had built, and with Mr. Davis's support, I grew even stronger. The moment to overcome Ben's manipulative tyranny was approaching, and I couldn't let this chance slip away. This could be my greatest triumph, and no shadow of the past would prevent me from shining. The day of the ceremony finally arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation and tension. The atmosphere in the elegant ballroom was vibrant, filled with sparkling lights and a crowd of eager, smiling faces. The soft music echoing through the room was like an opera prelude, setting the stage for what was to come. I looked at myself in the large dressing room mirror, and the figure reflected seemed to have a glow of its own, but a knot in my stomach signaled that fear still lingered. Nerves gnawed at my heels, but I was far from letting myself be defeated. Before the mirror, I took a deep breath and visualized what should happen. My speech as a sea of acid burning down the walls of manipulation that had always surrounded my image in front of my family. Today would be no different. This was the night I would dare to reveal myself, not just to the public, but above all, to my own family. Seeking energy, I looked for my mentor, Mr. Davis, who was chatting with some colleagues on the other side of the room. When he saw me, his encouraging smile was exactly what I needed. "Claire, you've prepared for this moment. Remember that what matters is not just the award, but your legacy. Today is the day to break the chains that bound you to the image of the lost cause," he said. He was right. The support and faith he placed in me were a flame that ignited the determination in my heart. As the ceremony began, increasing pressure mounted on my shoulders. The faces I longed to impress were there, watching my every move. The host gave a warm introduction of the nominees, but as the names were called, something in my chest tightened. The gleam of the trophy seemed to draw closer, but not without my fight. And around me, I saw Ben showing off, like an artist in his most brilliant leading role. When he took the stage, dressed in a suit that showcased his polished and successful image, there was an aura of confidence that swirled around him, palpable and almost suffocating. He began to tell his story and his achievements, a parade of successes that blatantly excluded my name. Every word he uttered pointed to a great ideal. Could he himself be the personification of a perfect case, as long as there was a suitable spectacle? My stomach churned. It was painful to hear his performance full of praise, knowing that his message was embedded with distortions and lies about me and my achievements. As soon as I heard my name announced, something inside me ignited. The knot in my stomach was now a surge of energy. Confidently, I began to walk toward the stage. The microphone felt cold to the touch, but that quickly turned to warmth, a promise that it was my turn to shine. "Good evening, everyone," I said, trying to keep a steady voice. "My name is Claire Miller, and I'm not just here to receive an award, but to share my truth." Those first words were the opening I didn't know I needed. Looking out at the audience and seeing some people taking notes gave me a new boost. The stage lights dazzled me, but their intensity was part of the show I promised myself I would succeed in. I would not only tell my story, but I would also transform it into an anthem of resilience. Then, I began to share my journey. I talked about my challenges and the difficulties I faced, how I fought to be seen and heard in a corporate world often dominated by louder, more authoritative voices. Every step of my speech was a blow against Ben's narrative, a brick removed from the wall he had built around me. I wasn't just here to compete. I was here to win the right to be heard. Stories of those I had helped began to flow, enriching my speech with proof of the real impact I had on people's lives. The true honor of being an HR professional is not just managing hiring, but transforming lives. As I spoke about each success, a wave of support and understanding grew around me, and I realized that the audience wasn't just listening to me, but connecting with every word that came from my mouth. And then, I couldn't help it. The energy began to guide me instead of controlling me, and I began to open up more about the challenges I had faced. Like many of you, I too faced the shadow of a strange and distorted narrative about me, fueled not by me, but by a fabricated image of supposed failure. I spent so long being labeled a lost cause that a part of me began to believe it. The reactions around me shifted. Looks of solidarity swelled with understanding began to replace neutral expressions. I intensified my account when I mentioned my brother. Through constant comparison with his achievements, I saw how issues of self-worth and acceptance had eroded my identity. I'm not just here to give due credit, but to break free from the shackles that have bound me. The murmur in the audience grew, amplifying my courage. We all have stories of struggle and resilience, and this is mine. You are not a lost cause just because someone decides to label you that way. Each of us carries within us the ability to change course, and that is my legacy. Time to reclaim my truth. The audience was now completely captivated. Emotions became palpable, like the heat on faces flushed with the emotional breakthroughs unfolding in the room. As I concluded my speech, I was breathless, but also euphoric. The feeling of autonomy and what I had just accomplished was indescribable. I not only shared my story, but exposed the truth in such a bright light that it could no longer be ignored. The applause began to echo and grow in strength, applauding not only what I had said, but what it meant. I was finally liberating not only myself, but the voices I had always been silenced. I returned to my seat, adrenaline still coursing through my system. I looked directly at my parents, and their expressions had transformed. The looks that were once critical were now filled with renewed energy. Disbelief and curiosity danced in their eyes. For a moment, I could sense that the stones could be moved, that the family structure could be redefined. Ben, who always fired his words like sharp arrows, was now silent. The change in his features was confirmation that the narrative had shifted. In a symbolic gesture of powerful liberation, at that moment, the manipulation he had always exerted not only dismantled itself, but became irrelevant in the face of my own truth. With the applause finally subsiding, the presenter came back on stage, but the impact of what was about to unfold no longer held the same weight. Regardless of the outcome of the award ceremony to come, I wanted everyone to know that I had finally found my worth. My fight for recognition had always been deeper than a quest for trophies. It was the reclaiming of my identity and the breaking of the chains that once limited my voice. The real prize would not be just that trophy, but the certainty that the story I had always wanted to tell was finally being heard. by me and everyone who was willing to listen. I had reclaimed my voice, and so I braced myself for what was to come. The night was mine, and I had finally taken the reins of my story. The applause reverberated through the room, a sea of clapping hands resonating with a new meaning, not just for me, but for everyone who felt invisible. The presenter returned to the stage, his face still illuminated by the impact of what had just happened. He took a deep breath, a sign that he was ready to move on. Stories like this remind us of the power each of us has to transform not only our own lives, but also the lives of others around us, he said, as the murmur in the audience seemed to agree in unison. I sat back down, adrenaline still coursing through my system. I looked at my parents, and the expression on their faces had changed. The critical look from before had now transformed into a hesitant acknowledgement. I could see disbelief and curiosity dancing in their eyes. For years I had felt like a shadow in my own family, but this moment seemed, somehow, to allow the stones that shaped that structure to shift. There was a chance, perhaps, that everything could be redefined. Ben, who always fired his words like sharp arrows, was silent now. The look that once shone with confidence now carried a growing tension. He watched, perplexed, as the room united to acknowledge what truly mattered, the truths he had tried to dismantle throughout our lives. It was almost ironic, how the same stage that celebrated his victories now became the space where I was finally revealing mine. My mind was still buzzing with the energy of what had just happened. I knew I needed to do more than just receive an award. It was time to expose the extent of the manipulation that had been around me. As the applause began to die down, I gathered my courage to stand up once more. Before we proceed with the awards ceremony, I need to say something more, I said, and the presenter's eyes flickered in surprise. He gestured for me to speak. The air was thick, and every person there seemed to be holding their breath, anticipating what was to come. This applause, I began, gesturing to the audience, is more than a celebration. It's a reminder that we all have the capacity to fight for our truths and break down the walls that surround us. The room was in a reverent silence, an almost worshipful atmosphere as I continued. For many years, the narrative surrounding me was that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve to be heard. That story wasn't just mine, but something my brother, Ben, helped perpetuate. There were so many times when the value of my achievements was disregarded, and I came to believe it was true. But today, I rewrite that narrative. My words poured forth with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. I looked again at Ben. He was still there, his expression of indignation growing visibly, his inability to manipulate further evident. What I mean is that true strength comes from mutual support, from collective validation, and I realized that by recognizing the importance of each voice, we create an unparalleled network of strength. I recalled the difficult moments of my journey, moments when not only I, but many others felt invisible, as if their voices were blown away by the wind. My eyes shining, I continued. Like that time I was called a lost cause at a dinner table, where the laughter was comfortable but the words cut deep. My achievements were systematically disregarded, but that didn't stop me. There's a purpose in each of us. The audience began to nod in agreement, and I realized I was starting to change the narrative. With each passage of my story, there was a resounding echo that followed among those present. I refuse to be the only one carrying this evidence of value. It's time for everyone to recognize and understand it. Everyone here, in some way, faces their own challenges, and we will be the narrators of our own stories. What were once murmurs began to transform into discreet applause, almost as if each person wanted to express their support silently, yet intensely. If today I can inspire just one person to stop hiding behind labels, then I will be happy, I said, and the room fell silent with the sincerity of what I had said. And in doing so, we dismantle the narrative that imprisons us. At that moment, Ben realized he was surrounded. His well-established manipulation was fading. His desire to maintain the narrative he had cultivated, where I was always lesser, was sown with doubt. I looked at him again and added, "It's not easy to undo what we've always been told, but we have the power to shape our own identity. And this is not just a personal victory, but a victory for all the people who rise up and speak out. As I prepared to conclude what seemed to be a manifesto of liberation, I saw my parents' expressions changing. The expression that was once one of indifference transformed into genuine recognition. The understanding was dawning that, even if they hadn't been able to see it before, they were now beginning to feel the waves of change. Now, more than ever, we need empathy and support. I continued. And we need to break down the barriers that separate us, not only individually, but as a collective. Let's support each other so that the future is one of inclusion. It's time we treat each other with dignity and respect, regardless of any label they try to assign us. With those words, I sought Ben's gaze once more. He seemed fragile, broken inside. This is the true achievement, I declared, turning to the audience. A movement that is not based on fear, but on hope and unity. The applause echoed once more, a vibrant sound of support that cut through the air in celebration. The transformation of the room was palpable. The voices that were once in the shadows now flowed from the brilliance of the lights. Family, friends, and colleagues were by my side at that moment, and that trophy I would receive would not just be a metallic object. It would be a symbol of struggle, a representation that each of us, by uniting, can redefine our identities. And when the presenter finally returned to the stage to announce that I had won the award in this category, my mind spun. However, this was not just an award I aspired to. It was the representation of everything I had lost and everything I was now gaining. I walked forward, fulfilled and rich with emotions, as I accepted the award. Raising the trophy, I stood silent for a moment, absorbing everything. The lights, the applause, the cheers, and the genuine connections forming around me. "Thank you," I shouted, my voice echoing. "This isn't just a victory, it's a call to action. Let's work together to build a legacy that reflects collective effort, a space where everyone is heard and valued." In that moment, I truly knew that my voice had risen. The real prize here wasn't just the material one, but the ability to establish dialogues about change and inspiration. I had finally taken ownership of my story, ensuring that others would live courageously in their own. As I left the stage, certain that not only had I won, but each of us had already won by refusing to remain silent. That night was ours, a cry of liberation for all who felt drowned in the dark currents of narratives that were not their own. It was a new era, finally. I wasn't just Claire Miller, the failing sister. I was Claire Miller, a woman with a story to tell, ready to guide those who were still waiting for a microphone. As I left the stage, the vibrant energy of the room continued to pulse within me. The trophy in my hands was not merely an achievement confined to a physical space. It was a symbol of the rebirth of my voice, and the recognition I so longed for. The applause still reverberated in my ears, and I felt the warmth of each clap, applauding not only my presence, but the victory that had been won by all of us. As I made my way to my seat, I noticed the dynamics at the tables had shifted. Everyone was chatting animatedly, and the celebratory mood wasn't just about me and my trophy, but about the possibility of change and renewal. I glanced around and caught sight of my brother, Ben. He sat silently, staring at his own reflection as if trying to process the transformation he'd just witnessed. For a brief moment, the weight of his presence held me back, but I quickly refocused and remembered the strength that had emerged within me that night. I was determined to bridge the gaps, to clear the family hurts and misunderstandings hanging in the air. Just a victory wasn't enough. I wanted more, not just for myself, but for all of us. Siblings who grow up in rivalry can find a way to unite, a path to understanding. So with courage, I rose again. "If I may," I said, catching the host's and everyone else's attention, "I'd like to offer a brief reflection." The moment was charged with intensity, and all eyes turned to me. The audience seemed eager to hear me. There was a solidity in their energy surrounding me that I hadn't expected. Today, I celebrated a victory that, at first, I thought was solely mine, but now I realize is a collective one. The room hushed in expectant silence. It's about everyone who feels invisible, everyone who, like me, for too long has been relegated to the shadows of stories that aren't their own. My eyes scanned the curious expressions. I could see both encouragement and questioning. One of my closest colleagues seemed to be paralyzed by the enormity of the moment in her attentive expression. This was an opportunity not only for my individual growth, but a chance to reinforce a collective vision of empowerment. And it's important to remember that, for a long time, what was called failure or fault is just part of the process that leads to discovering who we really are. We, as individuals, must not silence ourselves. We need to fight for our truth. For every untold story, I want everyone to reclaim the desire. For every story of oppression someone was writing, let them find liberation in this very space. Soon, smiles and nods of agreement rippled through the tables, and the room slowly began to murmur. It was a confirmation of what I already knew, that there was a collective desire for change, connection, and empathy. And Ben, I continued, moving closer to him, I want you to know that, despite our differences, deep down, all I ever truly wanted was a chance to write a new narrative together. We need to understand that, although our paths may be different, family should be a place of support. The shift began to manifest. The tension in his face softened, and I could see the beginnings of new understanding in his eyes. What had always been a battle between us could transform into a dialogue, a conversation that could rewrite our history. The applause intensified, not just for my presence, but for a new understanding between us. The host took the microphone again, but the change had started to unfold regardless of what would follow. He was about to continue with the event, but I knew I couldn't let this moment pass without its true weight being felt by everyone. The trophy was no longer just a symbol of an individual achievement. It represented a collective battle. The processes of burying bad narratives were now the meanderings of new stories. Through the corridors of the space, I felt a wave of determination and hope wash over me. Life is made of exchanges of meaning, and it was my duty to help build a reality where others, like me, could be heard, could be valued, and above all, feel part of the whole. Back in our celebratory group, I couldn't help but laugh and greet, as each exchange was a victory celebration. I was finally free, and every word I had spoken was now part of a new collective understanding. As the event continued, many began to share their personal stories, and I could see a current of shared humanity uniting us. I was no longer alone, and the shadows of frustration and insecurity that had once dominated me now dissipated with the strength that came from a new awareness. The music played, and everyone gathered in a warm atmosphere. In that camaraderie, a new pact was being formed, of empowerment, and the fight for each of our voices, without the weight of the past hanging heavy on our spirits. Looking at the room full of smiles, I realized I wasn't just celebrating my victory, but the opportunity to help others. As the night concluded, with faces lit up in celebration and music pulsing through the walls, a new awareness settled in. We were no longer weighed down by shadows, but seekers of light. In that space, like a constellation, we shone together, amplifying the truths that could be told and transformed into hope. And so, looking at the starry sky outside the window, a new certainty settled in my being. Life is made of narratives, struggle, and voice. And I was, finally, ready to tell my story. Not just as Claire Miller, the failing sister, but as the woman who started and embraced this journey to encourage others to do the same. This was, without a doubt, the dawn of a new era, where every story wasn't just respected, but celebrated. As the night unfolded and the echoes of applause still reverberated in my mind, I realized that the deepest learning was only just beginning. The connection I had forged with the people around me during those hours had transformed into something tangible, a collective commitment to not only tell our stories, but to translate those narratives into concrete actions. When I looked around, I saw faces illuminated, energized by the possibility of change. Every gaze that crossed mine was an affirmation that we were all in this journey together. Deep down, I knew this victory wasn't just mine. It was an invitation to solidarity and mutual support. I thought about the stories that had been shared that night, some so intimate and painful that they broke through the barrier of fear. The joy stemming from genuine connections allowed new bonds to form, and I wanted to nurture that. It was a responsibility I was willing to assume. With that in mind, I proposed that we continue to meet regularly. "Let's create a support group," I said, my eyes shining with excitement. "A space where everyone can feel safe to share their struggles and also celebrate personal victories. We can hold workshops on personal development and empowerment and how to stimulate leadership. We need to create a network where everyone feels included." The response was a wave of excitement. Fabiana, a close colleague who had shown so much support during the ceremony, immediately offered to help organize the meetings. "I'm in. We can do this. We can work together and strengthen the message you started spreading today," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Other people started to agree, and the atmosphere around us filled with a contagious fervor. My colleagues began to discuss ideas and develop plans. I was overtaken by a renewed sense of purpose as I watched voices that were once silenced unite in a chorus of solidarity. The room pulsed with the energy of a new beginning, and I felt part of something much bigger. "Furthermore," I continued, "we can gather to discuss the experiences that brought us here. Each of us possesses a valuable story that can inspire others to overcome their difficulties. We can invite people to share their journeys, and who knows, create a network of mentors." This was transforming into a movement, and it didn't take long to realize the importance of what we were creating. In an environment where everyone sought validation and support, each person found a safe space to grow and express themselves without the fear that had existed before. We could be a genuine reflection of the strength residing in our individualities, and at the same time, build a collective strength. As the event progressed, I felt surrounded by renewed energies and faces that now lit up with a deep understanding of what it truly meant to support each other. Many began to tell their own stories, the difficulties faced, the victories achieved, and how it had shaped their lives. There was a genuine desire for connection, a pact with a purpose. A young man named Daniel, who had previously been a collaborator in the shadows, stood up. "Your courage inspires me. For many years I felt invisible, but today I realize I'm not the only one. This energy, this exchange, can really accelerate the changes we so desire." He was visibly moved, and his outburst resonated with all of us. The room erupted in applause. The movement we had started was taking shape. Daniel was proof that every story told had an impact, and that by embracing our vulnerabilities, we allowed others to feel safe enough for the same exposure. Amidst cheerful conversations and frank sharing, the hours flew by, and the sense of community solidified. After another exchange of stories, Fabiana suggested that our group could work on a project to promote visibility, something that would leverage the power of personal testimonies. We could create an event in our city, a forum on empowerment and self-affirmation. Gather experienced professionals and others who can share valuable information. All the stories we heard today are powerful and transformative, and they can be further exalted if we expand their reach. Everyone started generating ideas for building an event that not only represented the journeys each person experienced, but also transformed into an act of celebration for collective overcoming. I was filled with a feeling of hope and optimism, a model that together we could create a strong bond that would extend for a long time. As night began to draw to a close, countless promises and plans were underway, and it was evident that there was a genuine desire to keep this flame burning. The energy that united everyone there was palpable, and I hoped that everyone would claim their space to speak. As the lights dimmed, I understood that the journey of personal transformation was underway, but what we were building was a bond of support and strength. As we left the hall, the night air was refreshing. The stars shone brightly, reflecting the newfound hope within us. This wasn't just a new stage in my life. It was a new life cycle that was forming among us all. The fight and the voice that we echoed together would be the main pieces in building a more inclusive, honest, and empowering reality. With this certainty, I left the party with a smile on my lips and a renewed conviction that my struggle was not alone. Deep down, it was shared. I had found my voice, and more importantly, the role I could play in empowering other voices. And so, as the moon shone down on us, I knew this was just the first of many nights where our narratives would intertwine in a pact of authenticity and courage. Walking alongside people who were also rediscovering their voices was the greatest reward I could ever imagine. In this new reality, every step we took would be a reminder that we were all a little more true to ourselves.